Relay connection established. Archive access granted. Origin unknown. Verification impossible. Proceeding with recovered transmission. Designation, ninth relay.
People ask me if the stories about the little people in the Montana mountains are true. I honestly don't know. I never saw them. Not clearly anyway. But I heard them laughing. I followed that laughter into the woods one October afternoon. And when I finally found my way home, 8 years had passed. My name is Logan Mercer, and I grew up hunting the Beartooth Mountains with my father. Dad taught me how to read tracks in frost, how to judge the wind by feel, and how to respect the wilderness. He used to say the mountains didn't belong to us. We were only visitors, and visitors who wandered where they didn't belong sometimes never found their way back. I always thought that was just an old hunter's way of teaching caution. The morning I disappeared was ordinary in every way that mattered. My mother called while I was loading my pack into the truck to remind me about Sunday dinner, and I promised I'd be there. My father called a few minutes later and asked if I wanted company. I told him I'd hunt alone this time, but we'd go together next season. He was quiet just long enough for me to notice, then said that sounded good. Before I left, Emily came outside with a travel mug of coffee. We were supposed to be married the following spring. She told me not to stay gone all weekend, and I kissed her goodbye and told her I'd be home before dinner. At the time, none of those promises felt important. They were the kind of things people say because they believe there will always be another dinner, another weekend, another season. The mountains were beautiful that afternoon. Snow dusted the high ridges, but down in the timber, autumn still held on. The aspens were gold, the pines were dark, and the air had that sharp October chill that makes every breath feel clean. Around 3 o'clock, I spotted the biggest whitetail I'd seen in years. I settled behind a fallen log, took a slow breath, and squeezed the trigger. The shot wasn't perfect. The buck lurched and vanished into the trees. I waited like Dad taught me, then found the blood trail and started tracking. About 20 minutes later, I heard children laughing. I stopped where I stood. The sound drifted somewhere off to my right, light and playful, like kids chasing each other through the woods. My first thought was that some idiot had brought children into active hunting country. I called out, warning whoever was there that I was tracking a wounded deer. No one answered. A few seconds later, the laughter came again, farther ahead this time. The blood trail led in the same direction, so I kept moving. Every few minutes, the laughter returned, always just out of sight. Once I thought I heard little feet running through leaves ahead of me, but when I rounded a stand of pines, there was nothing there. The forest grew quieter the farther I walked. The wind faded first, then the birds. Even the crunch of my boots seemed muted, like the woods were swallowing the sound. Then I stepped into a clearing I knew had never been there before. 2 ancient pine trees had grown together, their trunks twisting until they formed a perfect natural arch over a narrow game trail. Flowering vines hung from the branches, despite it being October, and a ring of white mushrooms circled the base. Beyond the arch, the forest looked almost the same, but brighter. The greens were richer, the sunlight warmer. Everything on the other side looked too alive. The blood trail led straight through. I stood there longer than I want to admit. I even looked back the way I had come and remembered something my father used to say. If you ever find yourself somewhere you've never seen before in a place you know by heart, turn around. I almost listened. Then the laughter came from the other side of the archway, soft and close, almost inviting. I told myself I was only taking a few more steps. Then I walked through. At first, nothing happened. There was no flash of light, no thunder, no sudden change in the trees. Then I took a breath and realized the cold was gone. The air smelled like spring rain and blooming wildflowers. The warmth caught me so off guard that I unzipped my jacket without thinking. I looked back and saw the archway behind me, but it seemed much farther away than it should have been. I turned toward the trail and realized the blood had stopped. Not faded, stopped. One last drop rested on a yellow leaf a few feet past the arch, and beyond that, there was nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, no sign that a wounded deer had passed through. Then I saw the buck. He stepped into a shaft of golden sunlight between the trees, only it wasn't the buck I'd shot. This one was enormous, with a coat almost completely white, and antlers wider than anything I had ever seen. Every hunter dreams of seeing a deer like that. Almost without thinking, I raised my rifle. The crosshairs settled over his chest. Then he lifted his head and looked directly at me. There was nothing unnatural about his eyes. They weren't glowing, they weren't human, but there was intelligence there, patient and ancient, as if something was waiting to see what kind of man I was. My finger never touched the trigger. The buck lowered his head once, turned, and walked silently into the trees. Against every ounce of common sense I had, I followed. The farther I walked, the stranger the forest became. Wildflowers bloomed beneath the pines. Streams crossed the trail without making a sound, and the sunlight never moved from that same perfect afternoon angle. I checked my phone. The time had not changed. I checked my watch. The second hand moved normally, but the minute hand stayed frozen. I watched it complete a full circle and felt the first real fear settle into my stomach. I turned around to leave, but the archway was gone. I tried to backtrack. I picked a direction and walked until I reached a clearing with a fallen log, a gray stone, and a patch of white flowers. I changed direction and walked again. 10 minutes later, I came back to the same clearing. That was when the laughter returned. It came from behind me, then my left, then my right. Small feet rustled through leaves. Pebbles rolled down a slope. Something moved low behind a tree, quick enough that I only caught it from the corner of my eye. I called out, but the forest went silent. Then from somewhere very close behind me, a child's voice whispered my name. I ran. I am not ashamed to admit that. I ran until my lungs burned and branches tore at my jacket. The laughter followed from every direction, not chasing exactly, but keeping pace, like children playing a game where I was the only one who didn't know the rules. I never saw a face. I never saw a body, only movement at the edge of my vision, trembling branches, and the sound of little feet over leaves that never fell behind. Then everything stopped. The white buck stood ahead of me at the edge of the trees. He looked back once, then turned and walked away. I followed, because there was nothing else to do. This time, the forest changed as he moved through it. The air cooled. The wildflower smell faded. Ahead of us, the two twisted pines appeared, vines hanging between them, the mushroom ring bright against the ground. The buck stopped beside the archway and looked at me one final time. Behind me, the laughter erupted. I ran for the opening and dove through. Cold October air hit my face. I landed hard in dead leaves and stared up at a gray Montana sky. Wind moved through the branches. A raven called overhead. The world sounded normal again. When I stood and looked back, there were no vines, no mushrooms, and no archway. Just two ordinary pines. My watch said a little over 3 hours had passed. I laughed from relief and embarrassment. I had gotten lost. I had scared myself half to death. That was all. Then I saw my truck. Every tire was flat, but not slashed. The rubber was dry rotted and cracked gray along the sidewalls. Pine needles had piled beneath the wipers. Moss grew in the seams around the hood. Small saplings had pushed through the gravel around the wheels. For a moment I thought it wasn't my truck. Then I saw the dent in the tailgate from when I backed into my father's barn, the faded hunting club sticker in the rear window, and the wooden duck call Dad had carved hanging from the mirror. The battery was dead. The cab smelled stale and closed up. My phone still had power, but there was no service. I told myself there had to be an explanation. I hiked to the highway and flagged down another hunter, who drove me to the nearest gas station. I asked the clerk if I could borrow a charger because my phone wouldn't connect. He glanced at the screen and asked who my carrier was. I told him. He frowned and said he didn't think anybody still had one of those. When I asked what he meant, he said the company had been bought out years earlier and the tower shut down about 4 years ago. I laughed because that was impossible. I had paid my bill last month. Then I looked up at the television in the corner. Beneath the anchor's face was the date. I read it once, then again, then a third time. 8 years after the morning I had promised Emily I would be home before dinner. The rest came in pieces. Search crews had looked for me for weeks. My father joined everyone, then went back every October, because he never believed I was dead. 3 years after I disappeared, he had a heart attack on the mountain, not far from where my truck had been found. Emily waited longer than anyone had any right to ask. Eventually she buried an empty casket, grieved me, and remarried. I don't blame her. She deserved to keep living. My mother was in a nursing home by then. Alzheimer's. The nurse warned me she didn't always know where she was, but I went in anyway. She sat by the window, with a blanket across her lap, smaller than I remembered, her hair nearly white. I said, "Mom?" She turned, looked at my face, and smiled. "Harold," she whispered. My father's name. She thought I was him. I took her hand, and she looked toward the window. "Would you go tell Logan it's time to come in?" she asked softly. "Dinner's almost ready." I couldn't breathe. Finally, I whispered, "I'll go get him." She squeezed my hand and smiled. "Thank you." Then she looked back out the window, still waiting for a son who had finally come home too late. Months later, I returned to the mountain. Not for answers. Some questions don't have them. I found the place where I thought the arch had been, and laid my father's hunting knife beneath the 2 pines. As I turned to leave, I saw movement at the edge of the trees. The white buck stood there, watching me in the fading light. I nodded once. When I looked again, he was gone. Before all of this, I thought time was something you could always make up later. Another hunting season, another weekend, another phone call, another visit home. I figured the people I loved would always be there when life finally slowed down. I was wrong. Time doesn't stop just because you aren't there to live it. It keeps moving. Parents grow old. People grieve. Hearts break. Lives go on. Don't wait until next season to spend time with the people you love. Because sometimes, by the time you finally make it home is gone.
Transmission complete. Archive updated. Relay connection terminated. Signal lost.